recently, as in just last week, I was advertised an article that was published in this magazine called The Atlantic, which is probably a magazine that I would never go and actually seek out to read. But the headline of the article caught my eye. It said, "The elite college students who can't read books." And I read as much as I was allowed to without actually paying a subscription. Sorry, I wasn't going to pay the $70 to be a member to read this one article, at least the entire thing. But what I did read was enough to get the point of the entire article, which was this, that college students are overwhelmed by professors who assign them books to read as a part of their curriculum in college, because the high schools that they're coming from are no longer requiring them to read actual novels or actual books. Instead, they're reading passages from books or really short articles and things like that to mimic the kinds of reading passages that they're going to see on the ACT or the SAT. As someone who's taught in high schools for a long time, this kind of took me aback a little bit. My students in the past, we've read all sorts of books in all the different classes that I've read. We've read The Hobbit, we read Perelandra, Brave New World, the complete stories of Flannery O'Connor, and lots of other books too. And the reason given within the article for why this is happening is that teachers are increasingly under pressure to teach to the test, meaning to mimic the kinds of reading passages that are going to be found on the ACT or maybe on the SAT, so that they can get students used to that kind of style so that in the end, their ACT and SAT scores will go up. However, from my point of view, this doesn't really seem to be working. And interestingly, since 2017, the average ACT score has dropped every single year since then. So for decades, the average always hovered somewhere around a 21, give or take a few tenths of a point. But in 2017, things started to change. And that year, the average was exactly a 21.0. But then in 2023, so just last year, the average was a 19.5, which was down from a 19.8 in 2022. So in other words, something isn't really working. C.S. Lewis, who's one of my favorite authors, he articulated really, really well what he called the principle of first and second things. And it goes like this. When you put first things first, you get the first things, but then you also tend to get the second things also. However, when you put second things first, you tend to not only lose the first things, but often the second thing too. Here's what I mean. A high school education should not be focused on teaching to the test. It should be focused on a true education. That word comes from the Latin educat or educare, which means to be led out. Well, led out of what? Well, led out of ignorance and into truth. And to grapple with truth at the deepest level, students are going to have to dive deeply into those things, into a subject, through books, whether those books be fiction, whether they're nonfiction. Unless we come to think that our new ways are always better than the old ways, the more classic the book, the better. So in other words, when high schools teach to the test, in this case, when they change the way things have always been done, just to teach to the ACT, we miss the educational formation that's necessary to be ready for college in the first place. But it also seems like we're missing the second thing too, which is students' ability to even read and do well on the ACT reading test. Now that might sound rich or strange coming from me because I'm the ACT guy or the ACT system guy who's teaching these test preparation classes and writing these ACT test preparation books. But again, the ACT test is different in kind than the kind of tests that our students are seeing in their schools or should be seeing in their schools. And that way it's a different kind of thing. I don't see test preparation necessarily as a type of education, but maybe a subset of education, if you will. So if you are the parent of a high school student, maybe ask your son or daughter, when was the last time that you had to read a book for school? How many books have you read this year for school? So from summer reading through the school year so far, what were those books? What did they mean? Were they good? Did you like them? What did you take from them? What did your teacher say about them? Maybe have those conversations about those books. And if your son or daughter really comes back with an answer that's more like 0 or close to 0, that probably means that their teachers really are kind of teaching to the test, or maybe they're just kind of giving up because books, it seems these days, are a little bit harder to read with our shorter attention spans. But maybe consider within your home trying to do something about that, even if it means something like paying your son or daughter to read a book. Maybe you pay them to do chores, and instead maybe you could just make them do the chores and then pay them to read instead. And when I say pay them to read, or when I say encourage your son or daughter to read, I mean read a book maybe at their reading level. It doesn't have to be Aristotle or The Odyssey by Homer or something. It could be any popular novel as long as they're reading longer texts and maybe grappling with the ideas and the plots and things, those kinds of things are really good for ACD reading and just for education in general. So with that being said, one thing I'm going to start doing on this channel is something of a review of the most popular books that have been traditionally read in high schools for decades, so that maybe we can come to a greater understanding of these books, what they mean, why they're important, and maybe, just maybe, somebody out there will pick up one of these books and read it and actually appreciate it. So if you have a book in mind, I've already got a good one in mind that I'm going to do first, but if you've got one in mind, something that's been traditionally read in high schools, maybe you've read it, maybe you haven't, maybe if you're a parent watching this, maybe you read it when you were in high school and you'd like to see it kind of come back, let me know by leaving a comment below. Thanks everybody, and God bless.